they had when I first arrived was, again, sort of like Arkansas State. They had one administrative computer, which was a IBM System 3 computer. And we had a lot of trouble getting access to it for student work. Most of the computing in the state was controlled through a central network at the University of Georgia in Athens, the main campus. And they put in a network, and they wanted all the smaller schools like Columbus College, they put terminals in those schools. And so the students, for class support, you would go to these terminals and you would do work remotely on the large computer at the University of Georgia. But it wasn't anything like we have today in terms of a terminal. The terminals were actually teletype machines. They were large typewriter machines that sat on a pedestal, and the connection was through an acoustic coupler. We used regular handsets, and then we would dial the number for the university network, and when we got a connection, we would put it down into these two rubber cups that form the acoustic coupler, and we would get a connection. And really all we could do was type and get responses over the network. So if you were writing a program, keying in the lines of code, and you would key it in and get it to where it would run, we didn't have any storage on the computer to save your program. The terminal, this teletype machine, had a roll of yellow paper tape on it, and you would thread that into a tape punch, and you would give it a command, and it would transmit the whole program back to your terminal and type it out. But while it was typing, it would punch the program into a paper tape. So when it was finished, then your copy of the program was rolled up on a piece of paper tape, and you would carry that with you as your storage. And if you wanted to rerun that program, you would have to take and thread back into the teletype and dial up the university, start it to run, and have it read that tape and read the program back in, and then you could work on it. So those were fairly primitive times. After I'd been there a couple of years, we sort of begged, and the University of Georgia had an old IBM 1130 computer, which was even old at that time, but they were willing to lend us that computer, and so we set up our own computer center for the academic computing at Columbus, Georgia, using an IBM 1130 computer. And it was, of course, a card machine, had a card reader and a printer, had a chain printer in it, where all the letters were on a chain for printing, and we didn't have really any disk. It did was so old that the card reader, of course, you would punch up what we had card punches, and the students would punch their lines of code on punch cards, and you would stack those into a deck of cards and put it into the card reader. And the card reader that we had was fairly old and worn, and it had a little problem that every once in a while, when it was reading, a card would get stuck, and one of the cards behind it would jump over it. And so even though it would read it properly and compile it, the card deck that you got on the output was out of order. And so if you read it back in again, it wouldn't work right, usually because two program statements were out of order, because it would sort of shuffle the deck of cards.
So do you feel as though you're a pioneer in the industry of computing and getting it started?
Well, not to the extent that a lot of people that are in the academy, people like Bob Oliver and Charles Morgan and people like that started large businesses and really brought a lot of things into the state. But I guess I was very interested in, I was sort of a pioneer of my own. I mean, I was in the days when you kind of had to learn on your own. I stayed at Georgia for 6 years, and in 1977, my brother convinced me to come back to Arkansas to help him with family. My parents were getting older, and they needed some help with business. And so I left teaching and came back to Arkansas and did some various things. I got in the real estate business. My brother was in the real estate business. I partnered with him in the real estate business, and then actually did some construction. We built a few houses and did different things, but I was not that comfortable. I missed the academic world and I missed computing. So there in the little town of Batesville, there was not anybody really in the computer business. And so I got some money together. I actually borrowed some money and bought an IBM System 3 computer, similar to the one that I had first used in Georgia. It cost $20,000 at that time. It was an IBM System 3 Model 10, a cardless machine. Used the 8-inch diskettes to key in the programs and the data, and set up my own data processing service. And I went out and got some business from some of the local companies. My two biggest accounts were, there was a regional development authority, which was a federally funded thing there that gave me their payroll. And so I started processing the payroll for this regional development corporation. And then I was pretty successful. I wrote my own payroll program, an RPG. And there was one of the larger employers there outside of Batesville was called the Batesville Lime Company. Had a lot of employees, and they had some special requirements for payroll. Had things that most people didn't have, shift differentials, and some special requirements. And they came and asked if I could do their payroll. So I wrote a payroll for them, and picked up some other smaller business and and got me a business going there in Batesville. And I'd only been operating the business a year or so, and there were a group of accountants. It's a company called Carter Mitchum and Associates, a group of CPAs that had formed an accounting company, and they were interested in getting. They didn't have a computer. They were sending out all their work to be processed. And they first came to me about helping them with their processing, and after we talked, they decided to buy me out. And so they bought my company and brought me in as their data processing manager. So I went from owning my company, my data processing company, to becoming their data processing manager. And they bought my equipment, but they sold it and bought a more modern. They bought an IBM System 34, which was a more modern machine. And then I started, and I hired two programmers to help me. And that's how we got started with doing all of their internal processing. And again, there were very little in the way of software, and I wrote their account processing package. It was a multiple client financial package that would let the accountants key in all the transactions, and then we would process and keep track of all the different client accounts and produce their financial statements, their balance sheets, and income statements. And I did that for a year or two, and then along about 1981, I believe it was, we were doing so well with that, and people were asking, computers were new and they wanted different kinds of processing. One of the main elements or lines of business of this accounting firm was accounting for small hospitals, and there were a number of small hospitals in the state and in that area. And so they asked me if we could develop a hospital package. And to do that, we formed a new company. It was called Professional Computer Software, PCS. I was the president of it, and accountants were partners in the company. And we developed a small hospital accounting package. It had not only payroll and financial, but it also had patient management software in it. And we developed it, and we'd hired several more programmers to help in the development, and began to sell it around the state, starting here at what was called Gray's Hospital in Batesville, and then several other hospitals that they did accounting work for. So that's kind of how I got into the software business, through working with these accountants. And I did that until 1983. And in 1983, it's a very interesting connection. There had been a professor at Columbus College, where I'd been in Columbus, Georgia, who I actually never met, but he came a year or so after I left Columbus College, and he worked there. And then later, he got a job as a professor at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, and he was working down there. And the university decided that it was going to form a computer science department out of its mathematics department. And they were brainstorming about who they could come and help get the program started. And this professor knew me, at least by reputation, and knew that I was back in Arkansas. And they actually called me one day while I was at work in Batesville. And they called me and asked me if I'd be interested. And I said, well, you know, I've got my own company here, but I'd be glad to come and talk to you. And so I drove to Little Rock and talked to the people at the university. And they were very interested, and I was somewhat interested, and they made me an offer. But it wasn't exactly what I wanted. It wasn't the offer that I wanted. So I turned them down, and I came back to Batesville. But later, I got to thinking about it, and I thought how much I missed the academic world and teaching, and contacted them again and asked if they were still interested, and they said they were, and asked if we could renegotiate. And they were willing to give me the package that I wanted. I mainly wanted to get back to a rank of associate professor. And they offered me a position, and I took it. And so I left Batesville in 1983 and took a position in the newly formed, I was one of the first professors hired in the computer science department at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock when it was formed out of the mathematics department.
So do you see computing as the center of your career, or more as a launchpad for other things?
No, in my case it was the center. Looking back, I see I probably should have been more entrepreneurial, and you know, I knew a lot about it and probably was in a good position to, if I'd stayed with the software development company or started another business or whatever, could probably have done well. But I liked the academic community, I liked teaching, I liked, actually even more than that, I liked to do research. So yes, from then on, I was strictly in computing. I had officially made the transition from a mathematics professor to a computer science professor. And as a matter of fact, I was only there a couple of years. And the woman who had been the chair of the department, of the computer science department when it was formed, very interesting, decided to go into the ministry and leave teaching. And so she left to become a minister, and there was a vacancy, and the department elected me to be the chair of the department. And so I assumed the chairmanship of the department, I believe it was 1985 or 1986, and served as the department chair for 7 years. And one thing that I did contribute, along about that time, I believe it was along about 1986 or 87, the Institute for Certification of Computer Professionals got together with some other groups, and the ACM and the IEEE, and came up with a computer science accreditation program where academic undergraduate programs in computer science could get accreditation, and they formed what's called the Computing Sciences Accreditation Commission, or the Computer Science Accreditation Board, CSAB, and issued guidelines that if a program wanted to submit a self-study and a review, then they could become nationally accredited. And I thought that was a great thing because Arkansas, didn't have a lot going for it in terms of computing, and the big schools, the Cornells and the Cal States, weren't jumping on the accreditation. They didn't feel they needed it. It's probably true. But the small schools could see value in saying, we have accreditation, we meet standards. So I immediately asked our department to go forward with accreditation. And so the computer science department at the University of Arkansas Little Rock was the first computer science program in the state of Arkansas to get national accreditation for its program. And has kept it ever since. It's been continuously accredited. And actually right now is still the only one accredited under the computer science guidelines. The Fayetteville campus has accreditation, but it's under the computer engineering guidelines. And some other programs have gotten it, but have lost it. And so, I think that's good that the University of Arkansas Little Rock has kept the accreditation for many years. So from that time on, I was in computing squarely, and stayed with the University of Arkansas Little Rock and served as their chair through 1993. And then I took 2 years off. I did a sabbatical and a year of research. And then at the end of those 2 years in 1995, I took a position with Axiom Corporation. And I worked for Axiom Corporation for 10 years in their research and development. Was very